Today, as part of our Business Spotlight program, I'm with Nick Keegan. He's the co-founder and CEO of Mail Metrics, and they're based in Dublin. So over to you, Nick. What is it you do, and for how long have you been doing it?
Hi, Kevin. Great to be here. As you said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a business called Metrics. We've developed a technology solution to help companies, predominantly in regulated sectors, to manage their critical customer communications. We work with a lot of banks, pensions, insurance companies, and essentially we help them to transform their customer engagement processes. So if you imagine your experience as a consumer of insurance, for example, traditionally you may have received all of your communications through the mail, receiving policy documents, claims correspondence. So we work with those organizations to help them to migrate a lot of those communications towards secure online digital channels.
Fantastic. Okay. And how long have you been doing that, Nick?
Uh, Started the business when I was 24, 2013, so about 12 years ago now, give or take. Um, quite a while.
Right. Okay. And you've been growing during that time, I think. Yeah. What do you attribute your growth to?
Yeah, we had a bit of a slow start, if I'm honest. We had no revenue for our first 3 years. The first iteration of the product wasn't a roaring success, let's say. But we got our first customer at the end of year three, and we grew steadily to 1 million in revenue by year seven. So relatively slow growth for the first 7 years. That was in 2019. But last year, 2024, we would have finished the year at 210 million in revenue. So a lot of
Oh,
our growth has really come in the last 3 or 4 years. Um, in our industry, because it's so highly regulated, um, and because typically when you win a contract, it's exceptionally sticky. It's very difficult to migrate a supplier just because of the complexity and the regulated nature. Organic growth can be a challenge. So to keep up with our ambitions, our growth ambitions, we started to focus on M&A, essentially acquiring other businesses for access to their customers that we could then onboard to our platform. And that was probably the biggest shift in our business strategy that allowed us to really have that accelerated growth that I mentioned a few moments ago.
fantastic. Yeah, that's very accelerated. And just maybe just off of the side,
Mm.
picking in a business, you were getting their customer. Is there any cultural challenges taking them over, or how do you manage all that?
That's the biggest challenge, to be honest. Generally, like we typically buy the same type of business over and over and over again.
Okay.
We're not acquiring businesses to bring in, um, let's say, complementary service lines or to enter you know, uh, new lines of business. We're essentially acquiring competitors that so we can get their customer book and offer their customer what we believe to be a much better, more digital experience. So from an integration perspective, technically, whilst it's not easy, it's straightforward. Because we can build a playbook or a blueprint and we do it over and over again.
Okay.
But the one thing that we um, you can't really legislate for is company culture, and we have done that particularly well, and we've done it particularly poorly at times, and we've tried to learn from that. So certainly when we have made an acquisition where the company culture is particularly aligned with the culture at Mail Metrics, everything else just goes 100 times smoother.
Yeah.
Whereas we have had examples, excuse me, where the company culture has been totally misaligned to what we're trying to do, and the reverse is true. It's 100 times more. It's 100 times more difficult to integrate. So I
Yeah.
think learning from those experiences, we try to, as best as we can, um, do some cultural diligence as well and understand if these people will be a good fit in our culture. Um, and ultimately, do we think we can be successful working together? So whilst we have done acquisitions in the past where we probably knew going in it wasn't a great cultural fit, I don't think we would do that again, if I'm honest.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, and if you had to start from square one in business, what would you do differently?
Um, how long have you got? I I think
Give me the top three things.
yeah, no, I think the main one is I mentioned earlier the first 3 years in business we had zero revenue.
Right,
Um, and look, we were very naive. I'd never been in business before. It's my first real job, to be honest. So
right,
maybe this is stating the obvious, okay? But for us, the mistake that we made was not validating our idea with customers. Um, we had this idea for a product. We thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, and so off we went and started building this software. And it was only when we got to a very advanced stage that we actually started to put it in front of customers, and pretty resoundingly, they all it didn't hit the mark, right? And we'd wasted a whole lot of time and money building a product that ultimately nobody wanted to buy.
right,
Um, and we take a very different approach now, where we never build anything unless we have a customer ready to pay it,
right,
pay for it at the end, or um, we will always try to identify a need, find a customer who has that need, and work in conjunction with that customer to build a product, um, so that we know there's a pipeline of paying customers once we've gotten to the end of it. So whilst that was a difficult thing to go through in the very early stages of the business, it's kind of shaped how we approach product development going forward. So I think speak to your potential customers, um, really validate your idea, and try to ensure that somebody's actually willing to write a check.
fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's kind of obvious when you say it, but when you're looking at the product, and it's one of the things we have with customers is I'll say to people, I don't know what you're selling.
Mm,
One of the questions we ask people is, what are you selling? And you get service and you get all the product stuff. But the hint is it's not your product or service.
yeah,
It's what your customer is willing to buy. So any business I work with, I will survey their customers to find out what they're buying first, and then I can find out what our guys are selling. And
yeah,
we can get very focused on our product and our service because we're sweating over this thing and giving it all. I think, but you're absolutely right, 100%. Go to the customers first, find out what they want, and then work your way back. Brilliant.
yeah, exactly. I think because ultimately it's all about solving a problem, and how big that problem is to the customer depends ultimately how successful you'll be. And I think you can get caught in the trap of just trying to build cool technology, at least that you think is cool. But if it doesn't solve a big enough problem, you're not going to be able to really scale anything meaningful.
Yeah, yeah. No, that topic is one of my bugbears with clients. Um, I suppose you've been scaling up, and we kind of touched on it a bit, but what are your biggest learnings what have they been as an employer since you began in business?
Um, it probably goes back to there's a couple of things. I think one of them is culture.
Yep.
We If I'm honest, when we started out, I probably would have rolled my eyes when I heard around terms like company culture, and I probably, because I hadn't experienced it, I'm not sure I put too much gravitas behind it. But we went through a very interesting exercise of trying to define our company culture, and we essentially looked at, as a senior team, we identified all of the standout employees that we were aware of in the business, and we wrote down the traits that those individuals had that made them standout employees. Um, and we then did an exercise of kind of keep, kill, combine, where we were trying to define what the essence of Male Metrics is, and if we had 600 people who all shared those traits, how successful would we be? And I
Right.
think when we started to look at it through that lens, it became a lot more tangible, because I could see the real star performers in the business throughout all layers in the business, and you start to spot common traits.
Right.
And so I think focusing on that company culture, trying to hire, fire, reward around those attributes and traits, I think has been very positive. Equally, again, as I mentioned, this was my first time in business, so we didn't. Me and the two lads I started the business with, Marcin and Pavel. They're my technical co-founders. We didn't have a huge experience in actually running a business, and what are the frameworks that other companies use to organize themselves. And so we went for a very long time without even having any concept of functions or departments. We all just kind of chipped in and rolled up our sleeves. And then I read a book called, I listened to the audiobook of a book called Traction,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
which was the EOS model. And that just gave us some very clear guidelines and a bit of structure in terms of annual planning, quarterly rocks and goals, accountability, who owns what problem. And I think that was one of the things that allowed us to sort of rapidly scale up, because we just had a bit of structure in place and everybody was following the same process, talking the same language. So I think, that framework combined with a focus on hiring and retaining the right people and having them in the right seats, I think that's probably one of the biggest learnings over the last few years.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know. I like the other book as well. Traction is great. EOS is an interesting group. But Zappos, I don't know if you ever came across them, Tony Shy,
Yeah.
Delivering Happiness. I think it took them about, he had started, I think it was Link Exchange. No, like the way you describe, without
Yeah.
and, even though he sold it for $240 million back before 2000, he regarded it as a failure because he couldn't bear working in the place he'd set up with his two co-founders as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was sure, like with Zappos, that he would make sure that he focused on. It took him about 18 months to come up with his vision, which was delivering happiness and talking
Mm.
to people and all that. But I mean, he scaled the business from a startup to selling it to Amazon for $1 billion in 2010, and he kept the company. No, normally, Amazon just swallows everything like a massive leviathan. But they said they couldn't replicate what he was doing, and
Mm-hmm.
of course, then they've expanded from shoes onto all sorts of clothing, etc. But that again is one that I like as well. Um, then is how do you balance your personal life with the demands of running a business?
You don't sometimes. It's so you just. I think that's a constant battle, and I think there's peaks and troughs. So I have I've a young son who's about to turn 2, and all the demands that brings. It was a lot easier when I didn't have kids, but I think all the demands that brings, and trying to make a positive change to be more present and not be working all the hours under the sun, has been an interesting shift. I think during business as usual times, it's a lot easier because I just structure my day in terms of trying to ensure I'm home at a certain time and trying to delegate and offload things that aren't, let's say, aren't urgent or don't necessarily need my attention. But when we're working on a transaction and we're trying to, acquire a business, raise funding, it's all consuming. And that certainly was the case last year. So I think as best I can, it's just a conscious decision to try and manage your time and your diary and your schedule and all the travel and so on that I have to do. But then there are just times where you need to be fully 100% focused on the business, particularly during a transaction, and it's very difficult to get away from that. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it's just trying to make conscious decisions every day and acknowledging the fact that there will be points in time where, just due to the nature of the job, you're going to be all consumed by a deal, a transaction, fundraising, whatever it may be.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, our definition of no, we've got lots of sayings, of course, but our definition of a business is commercial profitable enterprise that operates without you. And I
Mm,
do a lot of work with people on that to you can get the commercial profitable bit, but
yeah,
the interesting bit is to get it working without you. And as you say, it's about delegation, it's about systems, it's about everybody knowing where they're going, and a clear vision and mission.
yeah. I think um, I think myself and the other two founders have made a lot of progress in that regard. We've by and large removed ourselves from day-to-day operations.
Right.
Um, just so you listen. You always get pulled back in on certain things, but by and large, you've removed yourselves from sort of BAU tasks, trying to
Mhm.
take more of a strategic role. Realistically, if I didn't go to work for a month, like, the place would still run. But it's, I suppose, those really major events in the business, an acquisition, fundraising. I suppose that's the role that I fill. Haven't delegated that out, because I think that's probably my, if we think about, like, your unique ability, where you should spend most of your time, I think that's probably the area where I'm particularly strong. So that's where I focus. But I think you're right. Business should run without you, and we've tried our best to get to that point.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, I look, it can be a constant battle. But
Mm.
and do you see yourselves doing more acquisitions going forward, or that'd be
Absolutely, yes. I think we've on average done one a year since 2021, and we'll likely we'll absolutely do more. We've just done a very large acquisition, closed it in December 24. So
oh,
we are obviously trying to balance the desire to continue to grow with ensuring that we're integrating what we've bought previously.
yeah,
So the integration of the most recent acquisition is going really well, but we need to make further progress before we add another acquisition in.
yeah, yeah. You need to digest what you have. Yeah,
Exactly.
great. Just going back again, what qualities do you look for in employees, and how do you foster a positive and productive work environment? I think we probably touched a bit on that as well with the culture, but
Yeah. So I think one of the main things is we look for a growth mindset. So if you're going to be successful in this business, you need to have a growth mindset,
okay.
because things are changing all the time. We make an acquisition, the org structure changes, the proposition changes, like, everything is shifting all the time. And if you are not good with change and you don't have that sort of growth outlook, it'll be pretty difficult. We have this phrase, like, people and humility. We want people on the team who are good people to work with and are nice people to work with. And we take that pretty seriously. And we don't want kind of toxic culture creeping in, even if you're a really star performer. So we also look at, people that are able to demonstrate a customer first mentality, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. The customers pay the bills, and that's why we exist, to serve a customer need. And I think finally, then, like, solution orientated, we try to put a big emphasis on solutioning rather than discussing problems, right? So it's very easy to complain that this doesn't work, that's broken, it was better before we did this deal, or we're at capacity now. But as I said, that's always going to be the case when you're growing fast, and let's try think of sort of positive ways to improve our situation rather than complaining about it.
Yeah, yeah, you're definitely singing to the choir here. It's one of the big ones. If we can get that going in a business, as you say, you can scale.
Mm.
And maybe just to round up then, Nick, what are some common misconceptions about running a business, and how do you address them?
Um, so I suppose one of the things that I see a lot, particularly with first time or young startup founders, there's almost a well-trodden path of, I have an idea, I'm going to go raise venture capital.
Right.
And sometimes I think that in many cases that can be the wrong thing for the business to do.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what I did, by the way, right? So I made that mistake myself,
Right.
but only because our first idea failed, essentially. Um, did I learn? Was I exposed to this lesson? If I had spent the same amount of time trying to find a customer or customers for my product than I did trying to raise angel investment and seed capital and Series A and all of the different rounds that they'll go through, um, I would have been in a much better position. I would have understood a lot sooner that my idea wasn't, it wasn't hitting the mark, and I would have kept more equity in the business, right?
Mm.
I think if you have a product which, there's a very short window of opportunity, it's extremely competitive, and you need to scale rapidly to gain market share because it's a winner takes all type situation. Yes, you go and you raise venture capital and you raise as much as you can and you grow as fast as you can. But not all businesses fit that criteria. And I think sometimes it's better to, every situation is different, but I think where possible, it's better to bootstrap your way by winning your first few customers and really prove out your business model. And
Mhm.
then you're in a much stronger position when you do go to raise equity to sort of maximize your own value and maintain equity in the business and ultimately have more leverage. I think particularly with technology companies, the cost of getting started today is significantly less than what it was, you know, even 10, 15 years ago.
Mm.
Um, so, it should be pretty easy to, get get an MVP off the ground and start sort of demonstrating that you're adding real customer value. So I think that's just one thing from my experience that we probably did wrong, could have done better. And I just kind of see that as I look at other young businesses starting out, that they make similar mistakes.
Right. And for our listeners, an MVP?
Sorry, yeah, minimum viable product. So
Oh, yeah.
the instead of trying to build a fully functioning, feature-rich, fully formed solution that will solve every single problem for the customer, what is the minimum I can do to solve the customer's need?
Mm.
Um, so so that I can deliver value quickly and assess if this is actually a viable product, and if it is, then I start to build it out from there.
Fantastic. Fantastic. No. Nick, really appreciate you taking the time in a what sounds like a very busy schedule. Um, and there's a whole bunch of nuggets in there for our viewers. Really appreciate it. And fantastic model. And congratulations getting to here. And by the sound of you, you look like you might become one of the unicorns. Yeah.
That's the plan.
Very
That's the plan.
good. Excellent. Love it. Okay, listen, that's fantastic, Nick. Thanks again.
Good man, Kevin. Listen, I really enjoyed chatting to you. Have a good day.